Each of us has heard at least once that people use only 10% of their brain. But if this were true, then what the other 90% are doing? Of course, this is just a myth that scientists disproved a long time ago. Using highly advanced brain scanning techniques, they discovered that there are no inactive areas. Humans use all parts of the brain, which means we definitely use more than 10%. But do you really think that you use your brain's full capacity when you try to solve a task? Neuroscientist David Eagleman shared a fascinating study. This is Austin Aber, and when the study was conducted, he was just 10 years old. He is a world champion at speed stacking cups, a skill he practiced for years. In this experiment, a new player tried to replicate what Austin had mastered over time. Not surprisingly, the new player struggled. It's difficult to get something right the first time you try. But this experiment wasn't about success or failure. Brain activity for both players was recorded using an EEG. The results were striking. The new player's brain worked extremely hard, while Austin's brain showed minimal activity. Unlike the beginner, Austin didn't have to consciously think about where to place each cup. He performed the movements automatically. Do you often hear people say they do something automatically? Austin's brain wasn't really active because he was performing the task almost subconscious, just like breathing. Imagine if we had to think about every moment we make. It would be very overwhelming. This suggests that the subconscious mind plays a bigger role than we previously thought. A BBC article gives an example of a baseball player hitting a fast-moving ball. The ball flies so quickly that the player doesn't consciously think about how to hit it, he just does it. Only after does he see if he succeeded. In order to perform actions automatically, you need constant training. If you think about every moment, your speed will be much slower. This shows that our brain works remarkably well, but sometimes our consciousness holds back our potential. Consciousness thinks and processes information instead of giving immediate answers. Eagleman points out that there is a lot of debate about the efficiency of our consciousness. He explains that our consciousness turns off and allows the unconscious to take over when rapid reaction is needed. Our brain capacity is enormous, but we don't yet have full access to it. Here is a quote from Eagleman. Our consciousness records events with such delays that its opinion about them doesn't matter at all. Consciousness turns on when we wake up in the morning, but it's the smallest player in the operation of our brain. By the way, it has a name and it's called selective attention. Selective attention is our brain's way of filtering information, allowing us to focus on what's important and ignoring distractions. It's like having a mental spotlight. Out of all sensory input we receive, we only truly notice what we're actively paying attention to. Think about the classic cocktail party effect. When you're at a crowded event where everyone is talking at once, you're able to tune out the background noise and focus on the person in front of you. But if someone across the room mentions your name, your attention shifts automatically, even though you weren't aware of listening for it. This is selective attention in action, allowing our brains to prioritize certain sounds, sights, or thoughts over others. It's also one of the reasons why we're not overwhelmed by everything we see and hear. Selective attention enables us to function by filtering out the unnecessary information and keeping us focused on what's relevant. And this is especially important when we're dealing with complex tasks, like let's say driving, solving problems, or even noticing important details in conversation. But it can also be dangerous if you're being dumb and say texting and driving. When you shift your primary selective attention from driving to OMG lol, you also unwillingly activate your selective inattention, which means that you fail to see that cyclist who almost ran over, which not only would destroy his life but also yours, so don't text and drive. When your full attention is directed elsewhere, you'll be amazed by the scope of obvious things you failed to notice, and it's called inattentional blindness. In fact, you may already have been the subject to one of the most famous experiments of inattentional blindness, the moonwalking bear or the invisible gorilla. Just take a look at it.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
Great, right? Giving the prompt that you have to follow the number of the passes one team makes, your consciousness is focused on that specific task and nothing else. The original version of this experiment found that 50% of people fail to notice the bear or gorilla, whichever one. That's how powerful our selective attention can be. And that's something to remember the next time you're behind the wheel. One of the best places to start when defining consciousness and trying to understand it is considering the things that we agree are not conscious. Take ChatGPT for example. ChatGPT is an impressive program that responds to your questions in clever ways, but only because it's designed to do so. We wouldn't consider it conscious because it lacks self-awareness, at least for now. It doesn't feel anything or have an inner life. It's simply a program that responds automatically to inputs. Now, I know I'm not ChatGPT. I have a sense of myself, I feel things, but how do I know that you do? And for that matter, how do I know that everyone else I met is like me? How do I know that they're not some sophisticated versions of ChatGPT knowing what to say automatically? This question might sound philosophical, but it's famous and important. Essentially, I'm asking if it's possible for something to exist as philosophical zombie. That's right, something that reacts, responds, and behaves just like a human being, but doesn't actually feel anything. It doesn't know it's having its own thoughts. It just responds automatically in appropriate way. Imagine talking to someone, maybe a friend, and they talk, laugh, everything seems to be perfectly normal, but there is something strange about them. Something is missing. They don't have an inner experience at all. In fact, they might not feel anything. Sounds a little creepy, but that's a very powerful thought experiment used by philosophers when exploring consciousness. Basically, a philosophical zombie is a being that behaves exactly like human, walking, talking, eating, feeling emotions, but doesn't actually experience anything. No inner world, no subjective experience. They're like the perfect imitation of a person, but with no qualia, which is the term for our inner, subjective experience of things. So while we feel pain, joy and color, a zombie would just react, but without feeling. Let's break it down. You walk into a room and see a red apple. You might think, wow, that's a red apple, I'm going to eat it. You feel the color red in your mind. But for a zombie, there is no feeling at all when they see the apple. They just react, no awareness of what the red is or what it means. They're just going through the motions. Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, right? But philosophers, like David Chalmers, use the zombie argument to show that consciousness, the thing that let us experience, be aware and feel, might be something extra beyond the workings of our brain. It's almost like the perfect description of a philosophical zombie. Looks human, acts human, but no inner experience. It's kind of creepy when you think about it. Chalmers, a leading philosopher, calls this a hard problem of consciousness. It's the idea that while we can study the brain's activity, we still don't know why it produces subjective experience. Why does thinking feel like something? And why don't philosophical zombies feel anything? What's missing? And that's the big question. Could we truly know that someone else is conscious? After all, we can't experience anyone else's inner world. We just have their behaviors, just like zombies. In the end, the zombie question leaves us wondering, what makes us truly alive in the way we experience the world? Could there be a machine, a robot, or even another human that acts just like us, but doesn't feel a thing? So, the zombie thought experiment shows us that consciousness might not be just about behavior. There might be something deeper, something more mysterious, that goes beyond brain activity. It's a mystery that scientists and philosophers are still trying to solve. And while we might never know if zombies could exist in the real world, the philosophical zombie continues to spark debates about the very nature of consciousness and what it means to truly feel. So what do you think? Do you believe your friend is truly aware, or could they just be a zombie pretending all along? Let me know in the comments. What's amazing and profound about this question is the science doesn't have an answer, and it's not yet clear if it will have an answer. Let me show you another experiment. Here are two images of a house. There is one obvious difference between them, but to a patient named PS, they look completely identical. PS had suffered a stroke that damaged the right side of her brain, leaving her unaware of everything on her left side. Even though she couldn't consciously perceive the difference, when researchers asked her which house she'd prefer to live in, she repeatedly chosen the one that wasn't on fire. This suggests that PS' brain was still processing information from her entire field of vision. She could see both images and subconsciously distinguish between them. She just wasn't aware of it. If someone threw a ball at her from the left, she might duck, yet she wouldn't know a ball was there or understand why she reacted. PS condition, known as hemispatial neglect, reveals an important distinction between the brain's processing of information and our experience of that processing. This experience of awareness is what we call consciousness. And that brings us back to the beginning. Our brains works as they should, don't worry about that. Can we unleash its potential, or something will prevent us from doing that? These are my thoughts. Train your brain and use it as much as you can. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you and see you next time.